did you first grow curious about the paranormal? Dare you dig deeper? You are listening to House of Asher.
Hey everybody, this is your host Steve Asher, and you are listening to House of Asher. I believe this is episode, I think it's 106. If it's not, please forgive me. Like I said, it's been one of those days. So anyway, I want to thank you guys for showing up and listening in. And as always, you may be listening to us on Spreaker. You may be listening to us on iHeart, iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, also on Paranormal UK Radio, which carries us globally. And as always, I'm in their debt for wanting to get this little show out there. I really do appreciate it. Also, do go check out steveasher.com. That's my page where you can find out about about the radio show, books that I've got out, and new books that are coming out, and just different appearances and whatnot. And while we're having this show today, there's always a rhyme to the reason and a reason to the madness to it. My mom's family come in from Appalachian Mountains area, slowly moved it down into the Kentucky area, specifically Western Kentucky, where I'm at. But she had always told me stories of the hills, and in fact, a lot of some of the terminology and the way I speak even today is kind of derived from that section. And I was looking around at some kind of cool stuff, and I ran across a book titled Backwoods Witchcraft, Conjure, and Folk Magic from Appalachia, which is just right up my alley, or right down my holler, as you want to say. And the author's name is Jake Richards, and I'm lucky enough to have him here today. Hey, Jake, are you there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Awesome. Again, thank you for coming on the show. And as we get into this, just especially if you have a website, because I've already got people going, I love the title of that book. I want to know where to get it. And like I said, we'll get into it. Let's kind of build this up.
Yeah.
Are you a writer by vocation, or did it sort of happen? What built up for you to? There was a reason, just like a superhero origin story. What caused you, or what drove you to get into this interest?
Yeah. It kind of basically just happened. I just up and started writing one day, and then sending their proposals to, like some publishers or whatever. I mainly started it because I started studying it back when my grandfather passed away back in, I think, 2004, 2005. He was a Baptist preacher. He started preaching when he was about 16. And he had never laid eyes on his father. So he was able to cure, like, threshing a baby by blowing in its mouth, stopping blood with a Bible verse. He could take out fever with an egg, and all sorts of other things. So I started studying it and looking more into it back then. But then, with the whole, the New Age came about, and a lot of misinformation started getting, thrown out there. Things like stuff about like Jack Frost and the goddess Demeter and all sorts of other things that is just highly inaccurate. So that's basically why I decided to write the book, because everything that has been that has tried to contributing to it has, in my opinion, failed. Because there's just a lot more to it than just superstition and old wise tales.
Well, and that is true, but then also a lot of people, that's maybe where they first got their first sort of introduction to it. Like you're talking about, like the usage for eggs for different things. Yeah. And then of course people go, well, they're going to tie in a fertility element to it, or they're going to tie in this and that to it. So, and I don't know if that necessarily was willfully done in regards of a disinformation, or maybe it was just people blend different cultures in. But it's great that you're kind of setting the record straight with it. So how did your dad take you kind of reaching off into this? I mean, was he like, well, it's fine to research it, but don't get too deep in it, because of a chance of losing your soul? Growing up in a Southern Baptist area, they take that pretty seriously.
Yeah, well, in my family, we always kind of we never really called it witchcraft. I simply named it witchcraft because that's basically what it is by, definition. It wasn't really called anything, really. It was just something, what you did when you needed help with something, or, you had to get food in the house, make sure the crops, weren't blighted that season or whatever like that. Appalachian folk magic is deeply rooted into three different aspects, which is magic, medicine, and religion, because that's all that we had, back before the industrial age, when railroads came through and all that stuff, and we actually got connected with the rest of the world. So before then, there were mainly three types of doctors, even as little as just over 100 years ago. There were the doctors that were home learned, the doctors that were book learned, and then the doctors that learned, in schools and things like that. And even at the turn of the 20th century, most doctors were still, book learned. Basically, things and cures and remedies that they had read in books that were published.
Well, and
so
well, I was just going to say, there is, like you said, there's the learn as you go. There is a lot of times oral traditions passed down. And like you said, then there's more, I guess, what you consider more modern.
Yeah.
And certain way of setting down, here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3, here's a test. Okay, you got it.
Folks who went to universities and stuff to get their license.
Right. So, let me ask you this then. In studying this, let me ask you before I ask this.
Okay.
At researching this, because I know people take their traditions, I don't want to say necessarily very seriously, but they, if it's something that's a tradition, something that's connected to their community, they want it represented in if at all possible, a positive light, and not sensationalized, not turned Hollywood hokum, How hard was it for you, especially going through publishers? Because I know a lot of times, you kind of got your baby, it kind of the way you want it. And then you're going to have some people going, well, why don't we do this? Let's pepper it with this. This to kind of sell it a little bit more. Let's, did you have much of that, or was it pretty much just, hey, go with it?
Wiser was actually pretty easy on me, simply because some things that I initially wrote about that are in the Appalachian folk magic and conjure traditions are now today considered illegal. That was basically all that they, decided to actually remove from the manuscript, which is understandable. Because, like old lore about, the famous black cat bone, and it has to be boiled alive in the graveyard and things like that. I guess they won't, folks going out there doing that because of it. But yeah, the entire book itself, in it, I even, reveal that through the entire process, I was constantly questioning, was it the right thing to do? Is this doing more harm than good for the tradition, essentially? Because I was surprised, just even, initially signing the contract, that it was going to be worldwide. So yeah, I'm still iffy with my feelings on that one.
Well, there's that thing. It's the kind of it's that bargain. It's not necessarily going to be with the devil, but there's a give and take. There's
exactly.
We'll put you out in the world. Now, I'm just curious. What's the name of your cat?
His name is Malachi, and he's a Siamese cat, and they love talking to themselves.
That's totally fine. I always like to ask people because they always get so funny. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, my dog's yapping, or it's like, no, man, let him be on the show. It's fine with me. Now, I'm just curious. Is Malachi a familiar, or is it just, hey, it's just your buddy?
Oh no, he's just a cat. He's not smart enough to be that.
Oh, well, I have some friends that actually are practitioners, like in New Orleans and areas like that, and they have their familiars and this and that, and which I guess you would say more of a practicing agnostic. I think there's something going on.
Yeah.
I've done a lot with paranormal researching and things like that, and actually been in locations that I'm not saying they're ghosts, but I definitely feel that there's certain energies there. So I want to believe, but I'm still not sold yet. So let's talk about. You were mentioning.
Well, he's not like necessarily.
No, go right ahead. I'm sorry.
You're fine. He's not like necessarily like a familiar, like in the modern witch sense. I mean, there have been times where he has spooked me a little bit, to where like just the other night, I woke up at like 4 in the morning to find him in the bedroom at the foot of my bed scratching at something. And I always lock him out of the room, so I don't know how he got in there. The door was wide open. And then there was one other time I was doing some work at my workspace for a client, and all of a sudden he just like jumps right up on my back for no reason. So I do sometimes think, animals, have that sense of protecting against things, especially like haints and, ill-wishing spirits that get into the house. Because my family's always used, cats to determine that. Especially when they start acting, crazy for no reason. It's not a full moon or anything like that. So, yeah, we do sometimes use, our pets to, sometimes let us know what's up spiritually.
I read something recently, which I think anyone who has a pet, dog, cat, whatever, they definitely sense things that are going on, be it something mystical, maybe barometric stuff. You always hear about animals acting strange right before a storm.
Yeah.
Even before we could really track storms in regards to the modern way, you knew the movement of the animals. They start bedding down, they start moving out of an area, something's up.
Exactly.
I'd read something about children, I guess, when they were very, very young, to a degree, I'm not saying wide open, but can see somewhat limitedly into the ultraviolet spectrum, which would make a lot of sense because, you see a kid, they're playing with something, they look up, smile in the corner and laugh and wave, and it's just like, what's this kid doing? I've seen this with my grandchild, and you have to wonder, are they dialed into something else? Is there something else connected to it? Not that it's necessarily something. Most people when they think of magic, and I'll say that with MIGIK, when they think of it like that, they always think it's something malevolent or whatever. But it seems like there's just a natural element to magic, and I think it's how you use it. You were talking about like black cat bones and boiling them in a graveyard. What are some of these different little ones, without giving away too much of your book? Because, like I said, at the moment, I've not been able to get your book. But what's some of the little quirky things that maybe some people would know, and what's some that people just absolutely wouldn't know?
Well, with the black cat bone, it was always thought that black cats were always associated with witches, stemming down from the witch hysteria that occurred in Europe and was brought over here. There's a little bit, I don't know, the way I was taught was, of course, if a black cat crosses your path, then it's bad luck. But I was always told growing up that if you see a stray black cat walking towards you, then that's luck coming your way. But if you see it walking away from you, that's your luck going out. And there's like multiple ways to avert it. Men used to turn their hats backwards until they got to where they was going. I also often turn my pockets inside out, and I talk about that to turning rites because there's like different patterns to all of the cures and charms and old superstitions. Basically things that recur throughout the entire folklore, no matter where you look at, such as passing rites, which was an old healing practice that was mostly used on children. So, for example, if like a child had asthma or hives, the number of people that attend vary based on location. Sometimes the child's supposed to be passed between a mother and a father. Other times it's just 2 women and 1 man, or 2 men and 1 woman, or specifically between a woman named Mary and a man named Joseph. But they're supposed to go out to a little tree, basically like a sapling, that's basically like a year old or so, or as old as the child is. And then it's split down the middle going east to west. And then one of the 3 people attending the child holds open the tree trunk, and then the other 2 pass it through 3 to 9 times. And after that, the tree's supposed to be bound back together, and then if the tree survives, then the child's illness will go away. But then there's also ties to where if the tree itself dies, then either the illness will come back to the child, or the child itself will also die as the tree dies.
Okay.
So,
well, let me ask you this. The reason I'm asking is if people will either go to my Steve Asher page on YouTube, or I plan on putting some of these up on my stevieasher.com if it's okay, at least so some people can see it.
Yeah.
As you know, as reference, you have an image of a tree where, like you said, it has sort of like where the roots come up, and then it's a gap, and then it comes back together. Now, is that part of the thing that you're talking about right now?
Yeah, I noticed it one day while I was out down in downtown Jonesboro. Now, I don't know if that was a tree that was, that partook in rites like that, but it did remind me of, the split tree and the passing between. So that's why I chose, that as sort of a reference, because there's not really any photos of, children being passed through a tree. Because usually back when those cures were done, camera really round.
Well, it's so funny because people will think of which, and I don't know if this necessarily ties in necessarily just with Appalachian belief, but you could go to any old home around here. Of course, you'd find a horseshoe. Sometimes you would find items in walls. They would like hide an item and stuff. And I don't know if it's sort of to trick up somebody or is it acts as an offering or whatnot. Something I used to do, you were talking about the black cat. It's like, it was sort of like, okay, if it comes past you, you kind of cross it out. So I don't know if that's sort of like a kind of a janky sideways crucifix or something, or if you just sort of, if X itself has a magical component. I'm assuming it probably does. Everything it comes from, especially like early, Hebrew letters were like, like Kabbalistic type values and stuff. What is something like that you can think of beyond that people would do now that maybe is tied in with the Appalachian folk magic that they do and don't even think about it?
Well, there are a lot of, basic American folklore and superstitions that have trickled down to the rest of America through the Appalachians, such as like throwing salt over your left shoulder to blind the devil, or carrying a lucky rabbit's foot, and of course the black cat bone that was widespread in America. And
also,
then,
Buckeyes
like
carrying.
Walking, Buckeyes too.
Right. What were you saying? Not walking.
And then like not walking under ladders and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Now, is the thing about when you drive past a like over a county line, you lift your feet. Also, when you do, I heard people saying they would do that when a funeral procession would come through, which obviously people take their hats off and things like that out of respect. They still do that down here. If you see a funeral, most people will stop their, and turn their lights on and take their hat off, just out of respect. And I think a lot of that comes from, especially Southerners that have so much influence down from the Appalachian culture.
Yeah. And we can see that in, Decoration Day that's, happening now. I passed about 3 or 4 graveyards on my way home from work, and there were just about families at every single one, deck a grave, refreshing flowers, setting out food, different things like that. So yeah, there is a great respect for the dead. But I had actually never heard about the, lifting your feet thing. I'd heard that like when you cross a bridge, but not for like a county line or a funeral procession.
I don't know, and it could be just sort of a weird amalgamation of different things that we heard. Because, like I said, now on my end, like I said, my mom was French. Most of her family was French, and my dad's was English Irish. So we got a lot of different little superstitions and a lot of, like that old thing, if a bird flies in the house and you don't get it out, somebody will die.
Oh yeah.
All those little things. We did the salt, where you spill it, you toss it over your shoulder. Always said that was for good luck. I didn't realize it was I guess that would make sense to get the devil off your back. You hit him in the eyes with the salt. But to this day, I know I'll say something like, hey, how's your son doing, or how's your daughter doing? I'll kind of like knock on a piece of wood. If I don't have it, I'll knock on my head as a joke and say, knock on wood. There's so much there, and people don't realize how much that type of tradition is part of their lives. So let me ask you, once you got the book rolling and everything, how did you kind of go about? I mean, did you already kind of know a lot of this, or did you just start finding the oldest person in whatever area you're talking to and just kind of sort of said, hey, tell me about this?
Well, I do go to, like the remaining elders that are in my family, because a lot of the oldest ones, especially my great grandparents, they passed away, when I was really little. Um, I don't know, it was kind of like a mixture. When I started writing the book, I already had a large comprehension of it and had been doing it for years. I've been doing it for about a decade or so. I don't even know. Because I started studying it after my grandfather passed when I was about 10 or 11. So, yeah, about 10 years, give or take a few. But then while I was also writing the book, I would, just remember things that I hadn't remembered childhood. Or I would, make connections in my head while writing something. I'd be like, oh, this is connected to that too. Um, so it's kind of like, or I would also even have dreams where, my deceased relatives and ancestors would come to me and speak to me and tell me things, to put in the book. So it was kind of like a mixture of what I had already accumulated and what was given to me during the process.
Well, and that's sort of the thing that it's so weird. A lot of times people will go, well, let me, look at Google, or let me access this file or whatever. And,
Yeah.
but there's something you lose when, just like you're trying to read, okay, you're reading what somebody says, but maybe what they infer may not be exactly clear. When you can sit to somebody and get that tone and the cadence that they're talking, and the way they're delivering it, the look in their eyes, their body postures, gives you like a whole nother dimension and whole different nuances to it. That's awesome, man. The fact that you were able to do that. I'm much like yourself. Had older family that passed when I was very small, some before I was born. So you really lose that, and it's great that you still did have some in the family that could connect with that, or maybe remembered some of the stories from great grandmom or whatnot. Which it's just as much as this seems like it's a very personal book for you.
Oh, yeah, very, very much so. Yeah, I talk a lot in it about my maternal grandmother, my Nana Trivet. She's the one that I refer to every so often, where she'd curse you by the same name she blessed you. There was one night, because her sister, my Aunt Marie, passed away a couple of years ago. And her current husband at the time, which was her second husband, was real mean to her verbally. I don't know about physically because I was really young. But I remember one night, I think it was about 3 nights after she passed away, that my grandmother started going through the house collecting every single photo she could of my Aunt Marie and her current husband. I think his name was Carol or something like that. And she sat there for hours, cutting his eyes out of his photos, cutting out the mouth, burning the picture with a cigarette, all sorts of things. And about 6 months later, he was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and then about 4 months after that, he went totally blind. So that's when I came up with that saying, "She cursed you by the same name she blessed you," because Appalachian folk magic is very much about following the old biblical law, eye for an eye, because that's simply how the culture is and was down here. Because a lot of times there weren't full police task force to handle civil disputes and different things like that. But yeah, even with her, that was a troubled experience trying to get more information out of her during the writing of the book, because she is in the final stages of dementia right now, so it's kind of hard to get her in the right mood to where she actually remembers things. And then I actually recently found a photo, because me and my mother were searching through the house trying to find a photo of my great grandfather, who was one of the water witches of Washington County. Like, people would come and ask him to find water so they could dig a well or whatever. So we were looking for that photo, but we actually found a totally different one, who in my grandmother said it was her father. I never heard much about him. But in the picture, he's holding some type of little plastic doll with feathers attached to it. So yeah, so I'm still trying to figure that out there. So yeah, the book is very personal, not only because of all the work that went into it and all the family stories, but also because of as well as the personal journey that my spirit took me along with the writing of the book. Um, so yeah, that's mainly why I'm still a bit iffy about it being everywhere.
Well, and that's the crazy thing, because like you said, you've always heard people talking about looking at like Native American stuff through like Eurocentric eyes, and you
Yeah,
have someone in a different area because like a lot of people would think of the mountain area, and they would have that kind of I forgot like Hatfields and McCoy stuff. They're thinking of like the old
yeah,
guys in overalls sitting with the big beard with the jug with the X on it and all that, or you know different people that would the lifting up of snakes and all that, and doing that as part of their faith. Which I don't think there's a whole lot of
yeah,
that left. I think there may be a little bit of it in certain areas, but
yeah. It basically depends on where you go.
right. Which I have to tell you, as a faith goes, they're stronger than me because I'm not lifting a snake. Sorry,
Yeah,
I don't like
exactly.
snakes, man. But that's something to be said about, is your faith strong enough? So.
Yeah,
But it's one of those deals. That's what they know. That's what they assume is everybody at everything. Um, and maybe you sharing some of these stories with some, like some of the backstory to it, they'll see that there's more of a human face to it. It's not just
yeah,
a collection of yahoos running around and whatnot, any more than people think everybody in New York's extremely rich and drives around and this and that. There's country people in everywhere. There's hill. I don't want to say hill magic.
yeah,
There's hill areas. I mean, you go to New Jersey. I mean, that's a very large wooded areas. I mean, you go to Wisconsin. There's a lot of farms. Um,
yeah.
so I mean, there's more.
And just like I say in the book, simply, yeah,
Right. No, I'm just saying. I mean, there's more going on than just that element to it, and so
yeah,
it's kind of cool. So let's talk a little bit more about some of these different ones. We talked about the cat a little bit. We talked about like the cat bones and stuff. What's some of the ones that you found that maybe kind of was like, huh, that's really weird. I never heard of it, or maybe was there some that was sort of disturbing to you, like, I don't see why they did that, but okay, maybe now. And then after researching it, maybe you said, oh, well, it was just a thing at the time.
hmm yeah. I do talk in it a little bit about the about like Appalachian folk medicine, because Appalachian folk medicine, Appalachian folk magic often go hand in hand. There's not really like a definite line set between them, um, because you have to remember, like little over 100 years ago, the nearest doctor could have been 2 towns away, which was like an entire day's travel. And even when you got to him, there was no guarantee that he was there. He could be off at somebody else's house helping him. So there was a lot of, I wouldn't say necessarily like, fending for yourself, because I don't really think that was the attitude that they went into it with. It was more so, um, having to survive, to the extremist point, basically trying to, try or experiment with anything just to, get the leg to quit hurting, or, stop the bleeding, whatever it was. I mean, there's, like the old infamous sheep nanny tea, which was a old cure for measles. That was basically a tea that was made from, sheep poop, or, different things like that. Like, you really have to think about how desperate somebody would have been to, initially try that, or, keep it going. Um, so there is a line between what we now see as, there's scientific evidence behind it, like the use of herbs, and then, what say is just superstition, because most superstitions are born from, or are born, necessarily around human need, whether it was food, shelter, family, birth, death, whatever it may be. Um, so it to me, it's not really just a practice in itself. It's also a storyline of, Appalachia as a people.
Well, and the thing too is, I mean, someone had to research, someone had to trial and error, little things like, which isn't
Yeah.
necessarily magical, but there's a certain homeopathic element to, like, if you have a toothache, your X amount of miles up in the mountain. It's the middle of winter. If there's a dentist, he ain't coming to you, and you can't get to him. So, get some of those dried cloves. Make a little tincture of that with a little alcohol or something. Put it on your tooth, and the pain will stop. Slow down, and with enough alcohol, you won't care anyway.
Exactly. That was actually an old cure that I found from, I think it was Irwin, Tennessee. It was for a rattlesnake bite. You just drink a lot of whiskey. I don't know if the high alcohol content in the blood kills the poison or what, but I mean, at least you wouldn't feel the pain.
Right, and that's you always see those old westerns, and we're gonna have to dig the bullet out of you, Clem. Okay, they'll either give you a big stiff shot of some rot gut and maybe give you a stick or a piece of leather to bite down on. And I had heard that some certain woods, like there's I'm blanking on. I guess it's the aspen tree where you get aspirin from, right?
Mm-hmm.
From the bark, and they'll give you something to kind of bite down on it, and they'll have you go, okay, well, drink a little whiskey, put this in it first, and I guess it draws out some of that element. So who knew? If you look back at it now through our vision, mm-hmm. you're like, oh, well, okay, that makes sense. But how did they figure that out? I guess trial and error.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I don't know. Thank God for that, right? You think of like those little games, like on the Oregon Trail. I don't know. I forget how old you are, but like in the '80s, they would have like these video games, and it's usually like, well, sorry, you got dysentery. I'm sorry, you got eaten by whatever. And that was how it kind of was in that way. People think, well, it's the mountains, it's beautiful, it's sound of music. It was brutal. People died in mountains all the time.
Yeah. Especially just, what was it? Back in, I think it was 1870, there was the whole, yellow fever breakout, and there were millions of people that, just died because of it. I know down in Knoxville, bodies were piled up in the streets. And I know it started heading down. Orleans actually moved up here to, I believe it was North Carolina, as like a safe haven from the yellow fever. So yeah, they had a lot more stuff to deal with than what we do today. But the needs and the necessities of the work is still there, because we still have to eat, we still have to get jobs, we still have to grow crops if you're a farmer, raise animals, things like that.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. If you do,
have changed.
Well, and that's the thing. If you do research of any kind, if you're a historian, if you're an anthropologist, if you're a paranormal researcher, if you're a book writer, any of the above, and you will learn a lot of different history. We have a lot of places here where they talk like the Spanish lady. I don't know if that's like Spanish fever or yellow fever. There's a lot of fevers, folks. Mm-hmm. And what would happen?
There was a lot of fevers.
Yeah, a bunch of fevers. And the thing was, because of where we live in Western Kentucky, it's kind of the lake land, because there's so many diverging lakes and rivers coming down from Wabash down through the Ohio, down through Cumberland, down into the Mississippi, and back and forth and up and down. You can't throw a rock without hearing it go boom, because there's water everywhere here. But that was the water. Yeah. That was the highway of 1800s. Before the advent of the trains. That's how you got stuff around. And so people traveling, maybe they come from New York, they got a bit of a cold. Well, they come through that hasn't been exposed to people here. Boom, they're sick, and a lot of times it killed, especially kids. Killed a lot of babies.
Yeah.
Do you have any kind of magic or remedies that was for like talismans for babies? Because you hear about hearing like sigils and different little things that are drawn, and what can you think of that might touch on that?
Well, I know there was a lot done for children, simply because they were, the mortality rate of children was a lot higher than it is today. Because you had stillbirths, accidental miscarriages, different things like that. There was a lot of things, especially asafoetida. Those bags were hung around children's necks to ward off disease, as well as skunk's feet, which is another kind of like opposites repel or opposites attract. So I think that's the same. The character would do the same. because they would use a skunk and hang it in front of the house, like over the doorway, because they believed that the bad pungent smell, like
ward everything off.
But they were
Right.
vengeful animals, or so I believe that's a trail off on that. But there was also other, weird things that seem to come primarily from such as bleeding practices. And I did hear an aunt that told me about it, where after basically you take a baby and bring the shoulder blade and get a thimble full of blood, and then you, for some reason, feed that blood back to the baby in a bottle of milk. And that's supposed to keep them from getting sick during their first year while their immunity is building up.
Well, and I guess some of that could be the fact that the blood was in open air, almost like an inoculation, like a hill inoculation. Just kind of like, when you would drop food and whatnot, it's kind of 3-second rule. At least that's how it was in my house when I was a kid. I would be curious how some of your things in regards of, you talk about, I don't want to say ancestral worship, but places, certain like Asian areas, like Thailand, which I was lucky enough to visit, has ghosts and protocol for everything. It doesn't matter if you drop a scrap of food, you don't pick it up there. It's just you leave it there. It's for the hungry ghost. And if you you deny a hungry ghost its food, it's going to haunt you forever, right? So there's all kinds of different stuff. And it's funny how I wonder how much of like that Appalachian stuff would tie in with maybe old beliefs regards maybe like Welsh and Irish of like fairies and wee folk and stuff. Did you have any thing that touched on that?
Well, I did hear of like little people occasionally when I was growing up. My grandmother would blame little elves for stealing her car keys or different things like that. The only actual little people native to Appalachia that I could find was the Untitled, which is, I think I said that right, Cherokee for the little people. It was a race of little people that the Cherokee interacted with in their myths and stories and things like that. But they don't play a lot in the historical folklore of Appalachia as they did with the Cherokee. But basically, on the Colliner side, anything supernatural that wasn't in your best interest was simply considered a haint. So there were things developed to ward off haints, protect against them, remove them from the home, and different things like that. It's basically on a case-by-case basis exactly what you're dealing with.
Down, well, especially toward like New Orleans and areas like that, and Memphis, where there's a lot of slave culture. And did you guys do anything in regards of like paint blue, like painting roof, like the porch tops blue? Did much of that happen in Appalachia?
Yeah. There's a lot of houses down here that still have, haint blue porches, as well as the red rooftops. So, when a helicopter needs to fly into the mountains and get somebody because something bad happened, then they can spot the houses apart from the trees. Hold on, lost my train of thought.
That's good. You were just talking about the different things like that.
We never really had, money to afford paint to like paint the front door or anything like that. So we actually would just use, I can't remember what it's called. It's like that light blue tape. I think it's painter's tape or something like that. I think. So we would basically just, strap the door frame with that. The basis of it is supposed to make evil spirits think that, your porch or the ceiling of your porch is a part of the sky and that it's daylight and therefore they won't bother you because their, reign of power is supposed to be at nighttime. Right. When the sky's, jet black.
Well, and what's funny is that depends on who you talk to. Like if you go more down into the Creole area, same basic idea, but they think, oh, they're coming to your house to, for whatever reason, they see the sky, they think, look at the sky, what's in the sky, and it's heaven. Their mind thinks of heaven, and they're instantly released, and they are able to ascend and go to heaven and live out the rest of their eternal life that way.
Mm-hmm.
Which,
Yeah.
and it sort of shows you, it depends on where the culture is. Is a ghost evil? Is a ghost sort of neutral? Is it more of a nuisance but not really dangerous? It all depends on who you talk to, and everyone has different ways of, handling ghosts and stuff. So it's kind of interesting. It's a neat sociological study when you kind of are able to sit back and look at it like that.
Yeah.
So, but all right. Well, let me ask you this then, because we've touched on a whole lot of different stuff. My friend Linda had messaged me on Facebook and wanted to know where your book can be purchased. Is it, and I had a couple of people going, okay, is this paperback? Is it possibly in any sort of ebook format?
Yeah, there are Kindle versions available through Amazon, and it's available through Amazon as well on paperback. And it should be in, basically any local bookstore, like Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. I know one of my friends ordered it through Target.com. I'm surprised I haven't seen it on eBay yet, but yeah, it's basically available everywhere. Usually where books are sold, and there's like an occult section.
And what's so funny is, I mean, do you take that as sort of not sort of a backhanded compliment, but is it sort of like, well, I don't necessarily see this as a cult in regards of, because most people have a mindset. It's not so much. I mean, if you're New Age, maybe not so much, but overall, people think of like a big circle and everybody's in cloaks and it's all hoof prints and So do you kind of go, well, I can see it, but were you wanting it more in like spiritual type of section, or is that just kind of where they classified it, where they felt it fit best?
That's just kind of where they classified it. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily term it as a cult, more so as general folklore, because that's mostly what it is. It's simply stories and tales, lore that Appalachian people have lived by for hundreds of years, if not centuries.
Well, where do you think, and is it going in a new direction? Okay, you always hear about the Grannie Witches, specifically, which, kind of bordered on almost like midwives and stuff. There were a lot of time in European culture, at least from what I've seen, correct me if I'm wrong, people, but a lot of times you hear guys like John Dee and different magicians that were all men, the wizards and whatnot. But there's also, whenever they talked about women being practitioners, they were always crones and they were always evil, and which I don't know, it was sort of a male-driven thing, like no, we control this. But it seems like the Grannie Witches were just like you said, like elders of the pack who knew things, and you would sometimes come to, maybe you're coming to because you're trying to get pregnant, or you're maybe wanting somebody to like you. It could be something as innocuous as maybe a love spell or a good luck spell or a this and that. Or maybe you just like, this person did me wrong, I want to curse them. First of all, how much of that still happens, do you think? And is that dying out? Or is there a new generation of, be it Granny Witches or Mom Witches, whatever you want to call them, that are still learning and still keeping that tradition alive?
That I'm not exactly sure of, because a lot of, the culture in Appalachia is changing, because we are, getting more connected with the outside world with social media and technology, and a lot of people, they're very, and a lot of people, especially the poor folks, due to gentrification, are either getting pushed into the city or out of the city. And it basically depends on where you look at it. And these days, not a lot of people care to listen to their elders, so a lot of it is being lost. Whereas there are some younger people, whether in their 40s, 30s, 20s, who do still grew up in a superstitious household and still adhere to those beliefs and tenets. um, Whereas, a lot of the old collections of folklore, like the Frank Brown collection, or many of the works by, I think his name's Andrew Cavadier. Let me see. Andrew Cavender. Oh, Anthony Cavender. That's their source material was primarily older people, not really. Also help map exactly where that folklore is heading. So yeah, I do think are changing. But the whole witch taboo in Appalachia, because basically the person who was shadowed out as an outcast in the community as a witch, compared to the the yarb doctor, or the faith healer, or the root worker, whatever you want to call them, even though they could be seen doing the same exact work, whether it was healing people during a curse for one person against another for God knows what reason, it was all based on the actual attitude of the community. If they believed that your powers came from God, then you were good and it was okay and acceptable. Whereas if they believed that your powers came from the devil and all those exaggerated stories of standing on the oldest grave in a graveyard and renouncing God and the Bible and praying the Lord's Prayer backwards, then everybody feared you and you did nothing but bad. So yeah, it was mostly based on the actual attitude of the community, which it is basically the same condition, everywhere universally. The witch was always seen as an outcast, but then at the same time that either the church would be doing the same things, or other people would be doing the same things, but it all lied mostly with the actual beliefs that the community held about the person.
Well, something I was wondering too, because like I'd mentioned, like the Grannie Witches, the wise mother elders, that seemed more or less the kind of normal, commonplace thing in regards to the Appalachian witches. Were there male, more or less witches?
Oh,
Or
yes, definitely. There were many. There were a few men who were outcasted as witches or whatever. Just like there's an old folklore surrounding the book, the 6th and 7th books of Moses, that did somewhat trickle down here from Pennsylvania and upstate New York. But there it was believed that whoever possessed the book, regardless of gender, was a witch, and they had sold their soul to the devil or whatever like that. Mostly male practitioners in Appalachia that I've found have mostly been termed root workers or faith healers, or different things like that, whether they were they would stop the flow of blood, blow out fire, different things like that. Most of the stories that I have heard and came across from the region of Appalachia, where a witch is named, has mostly been women, and I think it's because of that whole witch hysteria that came from Europe, where mostly women were persecuted.
Well, and what's so funny is it seems like it's a natural thing. I believe. I mean, if you go to any location, for the most part, you go to the hills of like Poland, and there's different places, and go in Russia, and go wherever, New Guinea, wherever, in isolated areas, there seems to be some level of folk magic that ties in with the history and ties in with sometimes fertility rites. Sometimes it ties in with planting seasons, which is just as important. If you don't have food for the kids that are coming along, you're not going to make it either way. So it seems like there's a very strong tie-in with the land and with lunar cycles, and of course all that plays right in with magic. Certain times of the month are more powerful. There's certain bloods that are more powerful. It depends on the type of witchcraft. I mean, not to be try to be gross. I mean, it's natural, but sometimes people say menstrual blood is extremely powerful. So it depends on who you talk to, and what might seem really weird and maybe a little garish to us is normal. So,
Yeah.
it's you're left with the thing of going, we're thousands and tens of thousands of miles apart, but more or less people are the same. And I think if people were, let's just say, God forbid, all of our modern excuse me, conveniences were gone, and we're back to planning and working around the cycles of the moon and all this stuff, all these kind of stories I think would come back. I think
Oh yeah.
they're ignored, because
Oh, definitely.
the kids are playing Fortnite or whatever, and if it's back in the time when there's nothing to do but tell stories, because that was the way I was raised like the same way with you. That's what we would get, especially when it was wintertime. There was nothing to do.
Oh yeah.
Nowhere to go.
Right. Yeah, there's not shit to do.
Right.
Yeah.
So what's one of the stories that you remember as a kid that always stayed with you and kind of maybe drew you into researching Appalachian witches?
Mm. Yeah. One of the main stories that I was always told growing up was about one of my, Lord, I can't remember how many greats. I think it was great 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 grandfather, essentially a preacher who to different communities, and they'd stay about a week or two, preaching to the congregations and different things like that. Well, the story goes that he was traveling one night, and he stopped at this woman's house to see if he could bed up and get some rest until morning. And she said, "Yeah, I have an old shack in the back that you can sleep in. It ain't got nothing but a mattress, a lamp, and a little wind." And he was like, "Okay, that'll do." So he gets in there, and it really is nothing but a small room with a mattress that fills most of it, and a small lamp, and a window that opens up. So he's getting ready to go to bed, and he decides to open up the window to let some fresh air in. Well, as he's going back to bed and as he's almost asleep, a solid black cat jumps up on the windowsill and looks at him. And it looks at him and it says, lick paw, come in, Tom." And it starts licking itself, and it jumps into the cabin. Which, one cat, he didn't think much of it. He didn't mind cats. But then another solid black cat jumped up on the windowsill and said the same thing. Lick paw, come in, Tom. And it jumped in. And over, more cats jumped in, more cats saying, lick paw, come in, Tom. Until the entire shack was, basically ran over with solid black cats with glowing yellow eyes. And then the story goes that one of the cats climbed up on his chest and went to scratch him in the face, but he grabbed his pocket knife from his pants that was laying beside of him and slashed its paw off. And after that, the last time I heard this story, it was so long ago, so I can't remember if all the cats just flew out the window or if they just all disappeared at once. But he took that black cat paw and he wrapped it up in a hanky and stuck it in his pocket. Well, morning comes and he goes into the house, and the little old woman's, making breakfast or whatever, and he sits down for a cup of coffee, and she starts washing a plate or a cup or something, and he notices that her hand is all bandaged up. So he asked her what he did to her hand, and she said, "Oh, I cut it, while making breakfast." And he pulls out the black cat paw and unfolds it from the hanky, and he says, "Better yet, I think you're a witch." And then that's just how the story ends, as I was always told. So yeah, that's about 5 or 6 generations worth of story. And his name was Sidney. I remember that. Everybody called him Sid.
Well, the thing that I really like about that, and sometimes I think the best stories kind of leave it like, what happened? Well, what do you think happened? Do you think they drug her out for being a witch? Did she bewitch them? Did she say, "Join me, I'll teach you how to do this"? If give me my hand back. It could go 100 different ways, and you could tell it to different people with different endings. It's very much one of those kind of open-ended things that I think is great for having starting kind of discourse with people. And maybe you'll ask them, "Well, what happens?" "Well, he attacks and kills." Maybe somebody's more aggro. Well, they drag her out, this and that, and yay, and good wins. Okay. And then like you said, then maybe they would have someone talking about it. So, this is sort of an interesting thing. Can you teach people how to do this? Maybe they become practitioners. So that's again, I just love that kind of stuff. And that was the sort of stories that my mom would tell me. And it just seems like we kind of had similar upbringings in a way, even though we're, many miles apart. Let me ask you this in the last minute or two that we got. What is your address in regards of getting your book, and is there how can people contact you?
Well, I have a website at littlechicagoconjure.weebly.com that I run most of my business and service from, in regards to like products, certain spiritual services like root work, readings, card readings, things like that. But I also run a blog on WordPress called Holy Stones and Iron Bones, where I've been writing about Appalachian folk magic for about 2 or 3 years now. So there's a ton more information on the blog as well as in the book.
Well, and that's, it's wonderful that, we've been able to kind of keep that tradition alive and keep that knowledge alive, because that's the thing. People, I don't know. I think sometimes people get too far ahead of themselves, and they lose themselves in the mad race to be whatever. I sound like I'm preaching, but
exactly.
You know what I'm saying? And sometimes it's good to slow down, stand out in the forest, take your shoes off, ground yourself. I used to do that, and I didn't even know I was doing it. It was intuitive. Not that I'm saying I'm intuitive.
Growing up, I never wore shoes as a kid. My mother hated me for that.
God, I still hate them.
I'd walk around barefoot in 2 feet of snow in the winter.
I'm the same way. Yeah, I used to do that because I'd want to toughen myself up. Like I'm gonna go out here. My mama used to say I used to go and I'd stomp holes in ice and like little ice puddles, and she'd have to yell at me, and she'd do my full name. I knew I was in trouble. Get in the house. You're gonna get pneumonia. But I wouldn't trade it for the world. Would you?
Oh no, I wouldn't even recognize myself had that bringing.
Well, and like you said, it's hard to explain to people who haven't lived it. Just like it would be hard for me to maybe understand growing up on a military base, or growing up going from country to country. But like I said, there's so much rich heritage in your own backyard if people just take the time to study it.
Oh yeah, even in if people aren't from Appalachia or they've never been to Appalachia, they can start studying their own local folklore, because I know there was a huge folk healing tradition out in like the Midwest and like Texas and Nebraska and things like that, based on practices that had trickled down through Appalachia and the Ozarks.
Right.
So if as long as they dig deep enough in their own backyard, they'll be able to find the same, land-based folklore, folk medicine, folk magic that's already around them.
Absolutely. Jake, we're at that point in the show. I'm going to have to do my little segue out of here, but if you'll stick around long enough, I will talk to you as quick as I'm off air.
All right.
And thank you for being a guest. Absolutely. Everybody, Backwoods Witchcraft, Conjure, and Folk Magic from Appalachia. Mr. Jake Richards, check it out. I want to get it now. I haven't got a chance to read it, but now I really want to get into this book. It sounds extremely interesting. But what I want you guys to do, I want you to go enjoy yourself, and enjoy the rest of the day. But as the shadows grow long, as the sun sets, make sure to check under your bed, in the closet, down the back hallway, maybe down toward the end of that holler that they always say is haunted. But don't be afraid to learn, because sometimes in fear is knowledge. Above all, I want you guys to love each other, have a great day, and always make sure to check out stevieasher.com. And, I'm very blessed to have you guys here. And it's been one of these things that with each new episode, I get to learn new things, and it's been a real blessing. And please go check out House of Asher on YouTube. Also check it out. Check out the different books I've got out. I cannot wait to hopefully get to meet and speak to each and every one of you. But as always, take care and God bless. Be safe and take care until